Hello and welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today will be Adam Sparks of the Tennessean. He, of course, is Vanderbilt's beat writer for that publication. Adam, a year ago this weekend, published a pretty important story involving Vanderbilt athletics and its commitment or lack of commitment in a lot of instances to sports. We will talk about that story and revisit that 1 year later. Today's episode, presented by the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water. The Well is a coffee house with the mission to bring clean water to the world. Over 30 communities across the globe now have access to safe water, health, and hope. You too can make an impact by visiting a Well Coffee House today. There are 5 locations in the Nashville area. Those are in Brentwood, Green Hills, Bellevue, downtown, and the Cool Springs Lifeway. More information can be found at wellcoffeehouse.org. The Well Coffee House, where coffee changes lives. We also thank our co-sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center, which is located in the Gulch. Our news today sponsored by Sutherland and Belk, a local injury law firm committed to helping those who've been injured in accidents. If you or someone you know has been in a wreck or another accident, call Sutherland and Belk and see what your rights are. You can find their contact info online at sbinjurylaw.com. Vanderbilt's Hall of Fame class for its athletics hall this year has been announced. That induction is scheduled for August the 30th. Inductees this year are Josh Cody from football, Carla Thomas from women's basketball, Bobby Reynolds of men's tennis, Chris Gaines, also of football, and Laura Corner Stewart, who was a soccer player. Anyway, the August 30 ceremony will be held inside the Student Life Center. Today's guest line, presented by Boll & Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on Boll & Branch sheets for, I think, about 6 years now. The same pair, they have not worn out, and they are still incredibly comfortable, and I did not know what I was missing until I got them. They are fair trade certified, which means they are made under safe conditions by men and women, treated and paid fairly. Try them for a month. You can return them for free, but you won't want to. Once you get the sheets, try the mattress. That was voted best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That is spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code Vandy. Get $50 off your first set of sheets. Adam Sparks is our guest now. He is the beat writer for the Tennessean. Of course, 1 year ago tomorrow, as we do this on a Friday, Adam wrote something that I think changed the course of the landscape for Vanderbilt athletics, has certainly changed it. I think will continue to change it. Adam, thank you for joining us today. It's good to catch up with you. Hope you are doing well.
Good to be back on. Boy, it has been a year. Sometimes it seems like that story was 3 months ago. Sometimes it seems like it was 3 years ago. But yeah, it's been a year. Usually the stadium stuff that we write and we reflect on is going into the football season, and so that this is the time when we should be doing another one. But I guess there's actually a little more optimism for the situation now.
It's funny, sometimes you had those you remember when moments, and I was given a head up. You and Joe Rexrode were kind enough to tell me, hey, this is a big story and it's on the way. I remember I was sitting at a Dunkin' Donuts in Franklin with my kids 2 years ago when the story came out, so I still remember it a year later, like where I was and what I was doing when that came out. It made that big of an impact on me.
Whoa, it wasn't a Kennedy assassination.
No, but it did result in some things for sure.
Yeah, it did. There were a lot of follow-ups to it. There's quite a bit of reaction. It's funny, the reaction to that story. I got a lot of, and I know you saw this personally, and I know you had gotten it about different things that you had done in the past too. Is that when you go over to campus, you expect maybe some people are going to be a little put off by you because this is kind of rummaging through the dirty laundry. But most of what I got after that story was kind of a little fist bump, a little, hey, good job. I'm glad somebody did that. I'm glad somebody else did that. I'm glad that's kind of out in the light. sometimes administrators don't like those stories, but sometimes administrators do like those stories, and certainly people anywhere below them like those. And that's a lot of the reaction that I got was, we need something to happen, and putting the story out there will maybe push some progress along.
Let me ask you this, and maybe this is wrong, but I bet I'm not far off. My guess is the more that people inside there cared about Vanderbilt sports and its welfare, the happier those folks were with the fact that you published the story. If the concern was less, probably those were the people that least appreciated it.
Yeah, I think you are absolutely right. It's those that want something for Vandy athletics and believe that they've had one hand tied behind their back. Those people said, thank goodness this is out there, because people don't know the truth about how difficult it is to get some things done. Those that are tied more to the campus side, or maybe those that are trying to kind of tiptoe between the two sides, they were a little more put off by that. But again, in the athletic department, most of what I got was, hey, I didn't want to be the source for that, and I'm not the source for that, but I could have been the source for that. And that's the reaction I got from a whole lot of people. And of course, as you know, a lot of people that think they could be a source for that can't, because they know a little bit and they hear a little bit, but a lot of what they have is hearsay. You've got we did use anonymous sources, or I should say unnamed sources in that story. But we used them with quite a bit of background of, they know enough to be able to be used for a source and story, not just, not the custodian or the football manager. It's people that know.
Well, that was one of those things where I think people were so concerned for so long. Nobody wanted to be irresponsible, but it's kind of like a secret that you have a hard time containing because you're so passionate about it or excited about it or whatever. That place was just bubbling over with people who would talk off the record and I think wanted to talk. That I don't think that story was going to be contained much longer if someone were willing to listen like you were.
Yeah, you're right. And, as you know, a lot of times what this is, you go to a handful of sources. And by the way, not every source that I reached out to for that story, we were able to use. Some just said, I just can't do that. Others we went to, and over a long course of time, this wasn't in a week, this was in a long period of time. It was, hey, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but, what have you seen? What do you feel like is holding things back? Do you think things are in a better situation than what we're hearing? And, you would take what a source had to say once they had your trust, and then you compare that to somebody else independent. You can't go to a source and say, hey, so-and-so told me this. Is that true? You can't do that because then the information is not independent. But when you go to so many people, you gain their trust, and they all tell you the same thing, then you can come back around to the source and say, okay, here's the thing. We had a conversation, and I've had a conversation with 7 other people or 10 other people or whatever, and they've all told me generally the same thing that you're telling me. Can I use you as a source, already knowing that you have told us these bits of information that have been corroborated by other sources? And once you have that, then people feel a little more comfortable of, wow, so there's that many other people that have told you that. Yes, there is. Okay, yeah, you can use me then. And, that's kind of the way that works. That works in political coverage and government coverage, probably more of that than sports, but you have to use it in sports sometimes too. And I was glad that we got that story out there. We felt comfortable with it, still do, and I think it has made some progress. It's moved the gears a little bit.
Oh, I think that's an understatement. But how many people did you talk to in total for the story between you and Joe Rexrode?
Oh boy, that'd be hard to say. I mean, the easiest thing I can say is it's double digits. Now, how much of those double digits, it's hard to say. Sometimes Joe would be talking to people, and I would be talking to people, and we thought we were talking to the same people, and we weren't. Other times we'd be talking to different people. We'd compare notes, and we were talking to the same people. So it's hard to say. It's definitely double digits. And, that's a hard one to balance, too, because, you can't talk to 50 people in the athletic department or on campus or in fundraising or any of that sort of stuff, because eventually you're going to talk to too many people. And I've known this on other stories too, on this beat and in other beats in the past, is that sometimes you can talk to too many people, and they go and tell the principal, so to speak, and then the principal says, "No, I know what's going on, and nobody talked to this guy." And so you've got to kind of balance out where your sources are, but it worked out well, and Joe and I both had enough to compare to each other to get that done.
Yeah, that would certainly be a difficulty. Did you find that you were hindered in any way by Vanderbilt or anybody over there, or did anybody have to clam up in the middle of this? I'm sure eventually they caught wind that this would be coming out.
Yeah, no, I didn't run into anything at all. Nothing of note that I would say. A lot of what I got, or not say a lot, but some of what I got, and I'm kind of rewinding my mind here for about a year and a half ago to some of the conversations. A lot of what I would get would be, "Hey, buddy, I know what y'all are doing. I'm going to have nothing to do with it, but I know what's going. I hear what's going on, and some of us others over here hear what's going on. It's going to be interesting when this comes out." So it would be more of people that were not sources, that were very curious and were somewhat aware that people were talking about what was going on. And so when their stories came out, there was a lot of people, I think, had been brought up in meetings at Vanderbilt that, hey, the Tennessean is working on something. Does anybody here know? And then, of course, nobody in the room knows anything. And then they come back and whisper to us, "We know everything." And so nobody knew that full story until we put that story out, which is good. You don't want the left hand knowing what the right hand's doing. And I don't know what I would do differently. I mean, it worked out good. I've done other stories in the past where you kind of had to do some of those things, and usually you have some regrets or how you do it. Maybe we could have parsed that out into different stories or different elements of it. But I think the way that we did it, with one big burst of one investigative piece and then Joe's reaction based on the investigation that we had done, the reporting that we had done, I think that's probably the best way, I guess, just for the shock factor a little bit. You don't want to shock people in journalism, but if it's the truth, it's the truth. And like you said, you remember when some of those stories came out, so I suppose it had the right impact.
Well, I haven't done too many things of the nature of what you did. One of those where, like, you write it and you kind of got to have that little pit in your stomach that, like, okay, I know this is true, but I know people aren't going to be happy about it. And then the danger in a story like that is, let's say that you got something a little bit wrong that didn't materially change the story. And I don't mean wrong like you were reckless with the facts, but like there was another side to the story or another detail that you missed that you didn't know, that it wasn't from lack from trying, because it's one of these things that you can get to a point where it's paralyzing, that like there's always a detail out there that you don't know. And so you're cognizant and respectful of that. And if you take that completely seriously, then you never write anything. But you get to a point where you're like, okay, I feel I'm pretty comfortable with this, but what happens if, there's a rock out there I didn't dig under and I didn't get all my T's crossed or my I's dotted exactly, even though the story, as I told it, was true. You don't want to let a detail that you missed wreck your credibility later. I think that's the part, if I'm putting myself in your shoes, that I would have been nervous about.
Yeah, that's true. You do get that pit in your stomach. And a lot of it is the details, because there were details. I don't remember how long that initial story was, but I bet about a quarter of it never made print because it's, well, this is 80% for sure, and this other stuff is 100% sure, and this 80%, that's a really good detail. Well, but it's 80% sure, and so eventually you have to cut some of that stuff, and you're right about some of those details. You're always worried that you don't want one bad branch to kind of kill the whole tree, but you do run that risk a little bit. After the fact, I didn't really get anybody, coming back and say, hey, I'm not a source for that, but I know about that, and that's wrong. I actually didn't get that. Now, sometimes I would get, some people that may publicly or not publicly, some people that maybe would reflect that internally. I know that I don't know what that guy's talking about, and this isn't true, and that isn't true, and that's not my perspective. And then you would know secondhand that they were saying quite the opposite in a different part of the building. So when you hear that, you feel good about what you reported. Those things are just so tough. And to be honest with you, I'm not. I've developed a skill set some in this job to do different kinds of stories. My skill set over the years, I've learned that it's more in tune with feature stories, profiles. In baseball season, a lot of people read the Tyler Brown story, the relief pitcher for Vandy, obviously, with the really crazy backstory. Kind of those heartfelt player profile, human interest stories are what I think my skill set is. Not as much investigative, what we call watchdog journalism, but here and there, if you've got a good team working with you, you can make that work, and that one certainly did.
Well, as you talk through some of the issues too, I'm reminded that I remember a few years ago, I started to kind of find out how screwed up things were over there. And people would ask me stuff on the message board, and I would say, okay, this is what I'm hearing, and this is what I know. And the reaction at first was shock and outrage, and I can't believe you said that, and that can't be true, and you've got this agenda, or you've got that agenda, or, the other one was, I can't believe you're writing that because you've got to cover the program, or things like that. And I'm thinking, well, I know where it came from. And sometimes you would be surprised where these things come from. And I know it's true. Like I knew that my stuff was solid, but if your audience is skeptical, then you have an issue, whether you're 100% right or
Sure.
100% wrong. So I think that the reception to that got a little more favorable over the years as the details piled up. And really, as Vanderbilt just didn't do anything with sports in terms of commitments and things. They would say things and they'd go silent. So I think by the time it got to your story, I don't know that the shock value was as great as it could have been, but I'm sure it probably caught most fans off guard for sure. So I think that's one challenge that I kind of went through, is just being the guy to, as you did in your own way, to take the lid off some of that. It's always met with resistance, but I think your story aged really well, and I think you had your facts really well lined up, which I think also kind of limited the resistance you got. The other thing that I'm sure you found, I would say stuff at times, and then I would get an email from somebody that I was acquainted with or didn't know at all, and it would read like, hey, I'm so-and-so, and I was affiliated with Vanderbilt through such and such time, and yeah, the details that you're saying, I know they're not popular, but that lines up with my experience. And I would get a lot of those over the years where I would just kind of get confirmation that I was warm. I think you got a lot. So I would imagine your experience was like that. Number two, the issue with the story like that, I think there's two more issues. The principals who should have been commenting, David Williams and Nick Zeppos, just didn't, A. And B, I think sometimes through my experience, and I don't know if this hits on any specifics that you found, but sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and even if it's true, it's hard for people to believe.
Yeah, and a few things on that. You and I have talked many times over the years about how, like, our jobs are similar, but they're different. Our audiences are different. The way we cover the beat is different because of those audiences and because of our outlet. Yours covering being so deep into and surrounded by the Vandy fan base and the rabid fan base, the rabid portion of the fan base. I think there's different pressures that you have to deal with that maybe I don't. So where people, I know you from over the years of being an impartial journalist. People within the rabid portion of that fan base, just like they are in any fan base, tends to think that some people have agendas. So maybe they don't believe everything that they read because they feel like there's got to be an agenda there. I feel like people knowing that the beat writer at the Tennessean, whether it's me or somebody else, can look at it and say, I can say, I don't really care if Vandy gets a new stadium or not. I don't care if they renovate it. I don't care how much money they raise. It matters none to me in my life. And I think people can understand that. I'm here to cover the team. I cover this team today and tomorrow. I really enjoy Vanderbilt, the people around it and the fans and all that. But if I'm covering a different team next week, that's what my job is then. So I think maybe it was a little easier to do that type of story from that standpoint, knowing already a lot of the background that you had uncovered over the years. And you and I get emails from similar people, right? So we get, you get a lot of that confirmation after the fact. Yeah, I wasn't going to say it, but I worked there for this many years, and I was still in contact with so-and-so that worked this many years. He's about to email you also, and that's what we remember. That's what we remember when we were there. You mentioned David Williams. Now Nick Zeppos should have commented, and obviously we had quite an ordeal trying to get him to comment, and he wouldn't. I think that says enough right there when somebody just will not even deny a story. It's one thing not to confirm it; it's another thing not to comment much on it, but not even to say no, that's not true. That confirms a lot of times of what you report. On David Williams' part, I am thankful in retrospect that didn't, he passes away right after he retires. I'm glad that we weren't put in that position to do that story after the fact, because it would have been awkward. I don't think David had much room to wiggle when he was in that position. He had to kind of balance two different worlds in a tough position as the AD over there. And so had we had to do that story after he had resigned and after he had passed away, it could have been awkward. It could have looked like in bad taste. We would have almost had to, written him out of the script of that, or maybe made it clear that he was not to blame for a lot of the issues that they had over there. I don't know how we would have done that. I'm thankful we didn't have to do it. But I think people in retrospect too look at it like there were problems with the system, which there still is. But that David Williams was not the culprit necessarily of where those problems came from.
Yeah, that was the follow-up question I had. I don't think it's necessarily as simple to blame it on one person. I think that David could have done a lot of things differently. I think at the same time, it's kind of I don't know how to put this, but I think that David, even if he had been given clearance to do certain things, lacked the ability. But on the other hand, even if David had the ability, my question was the clearance. In hindsight, as you continue to learn stuff, and you know this, we've talked about it, when you publish something like that, what it brings is an avalanche of either denials or confirmation. I think we know which you got the most of, if not just pretty much all confirmation. With the benefit of what you've learned in the years since, what was the force that stopped progress over there? Was it Nick Zeppos? Was it the board? Where do you think the blame chiefly lies?
Well, it's hard to put a name on it. If I could put a name on it, a name to it, I would. It's more of a system where nobody wants to be the one that reverses the system that seemingly works for most people. Vandy is a tremendous academic institution, and that's really, really what you're supposed to be focused on. But it's a long narrative over there in many places. you can balance a little. You can balance some athletics with academics. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You're not going to turn into, fill in the blank SEC state school tomorrow if you put some more money into athletics. And that's what Malcolm Turner is trying to do, trying to get more of that balance. So I think there was a system in place that nobody wants to be the one that changed that system, that rocked the boat a little bit. I was talking to this summer. I was talking to somebody I know that works in the athletic department at Northwestern, and they asked about how Vanderbilt was going, and we kind of compared notes. And every little tidbit of the narrative that we spit out, the other one said, "Yep, that's same here." Now, Northwestern just recently built that big athletic facility there, and so they kind of turned the corner a little bit. They have not put money into the stadium or anything like that, but they put a ton of money into an athletic facility. And so that was their way of saying, we're going to put a little more balance to this. But still the same complaints are made there. Stanford has kind of gotten beyond that. Duke still deals with that some. Any high academic institution, you're going to deal with that. And you've got to have somebody with some clout and somebody with access to fundraising that says, hey, guys, listen, we can keep this storyline going as it's always been and just tweak it a little bit. And I think nobody over there wanted to apply that tweak. Malcolm Turner, I think at least early on, looks like he may have enough leverage and enough ideas to do that. I think he's been given the okay more than his predecessors have. He's very much an outsider, and I think to my surprise, it appears that in his interview process, he was given an understanding and an assurance that he could make those tweaks and he could rock the boat a little bit. And we'll see if he comes through with that. But I know he is convinced that he's been given that okay. And with a new chancellor coming in, maybe that makes it easier, because he's that chancellor is then going to come in and understand what the landscape is when they come in, when he or she comes in. Or, it can make it harder. Maybe that person is hired by a portion of the board of trust that wants things back to how they've been. And so we'll just kind of see how that situation goes. But I think Malcolm Turner is in a good spot to get some things change, and they're still going to be minor. I mean, I'm sure we could talk about this. I don't think they're gonna demolish the current stadium and build a brand new one. I just don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be a renovation, big or small. But I see tweaks, maybe larger tweaks, but I don't see wrecking the system. That's just not going to happen at Vanderbilt. And by the way, it shouldn't happen at Vanderbilt.
Now that's interesting, because that kind of conflicts with some things that I have heard and thought. My feeling all along, and it's not just, it's something that's been backed up by some comments and things. I've always thought for a few months now that they will tear down that stadium and build something new where the football practice field is. Now, look, I always qualify everything with it is Vanderbilt, and plans have been made and plans have been changed so many times that I never would bet a huge amount of money on anything if I were to do that. But that's one place where I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it stands out. I'm interested to hear you say that, though.
Well, let me say this. I know there's been multiple plans discussed and multiple sites discussed. That's my hunch. Maybe I should preface it with that. My hunch is that they will not build a completely brand new stadium. So please, nobody tweet that I've reported that they're going to have a new stadium, that they're going to only do a renovation and not a new stadium. But my hunch is that they are, based on a lot of things that I've heard, that more people are leaning toward a renovation. Now, if you tear down one side of the stands and then you renovate a good portion of the other side, and you tear apart what's underneath, is that a new stadium or is that a renovated stadium? If the field is still the same, is that a renovated stadium or a new stadium? I think you could get a little bit into semantics. Certainly what you're talking about, the other site, that would be a new stadium. I think what this ultimately comes down to, and this would be Malcolm Turner and the board and a lot of different entities over there. A lot of it's probably going to come down to math. I mean, it's, you put in bids for, this is plan A, this is plan B, and this is plan C, and one of them costs $100 million, and one of them costs $300, and one of them costs $500. Okay, well, what can we raise? Can we raise $300? Maybe. Well, okay, so we're going to do the $100 million, or we may attempt to do the $300 million, but we're not going to do the $500 million. I mean, I think it's usually simpler than we think. It just comes down to math and how much funds can be raised and how far you want to extend yourself. And the new stadium can happen. I tend to lean towards the renovation because I think that seems the most sensible, and that seems the most middle ground that they could reach with different plans.
Well, whatever way it goes, and for all I know, what I heard has been weeks. Maybe with more information, the plans change. Maybe neither of us are right. Who knows? But maybe we're both right in our own ways, and things are changing today or tomorrow. There's a million things that can go. But I think what neither of us can really deny, though, is the fact that it certainly made an impact. And I think you guys were the right guys to write the story, because from my experience in dealing with them, I'm not going to say that what we say and write isn't important to them, but it is paled in comparison to what they think of you guys. The Tennessean to Vanderbilt has always been sort of the holy grail of the media outlets. And so I think for you guys to write what you wrote, you turned out to be the right people for that story, because I think if any others of us wrote that, I don't know that it would have had the impact that it did when you and Joe did.
Well, I appreciate that, and what maybe said that a little bit to me is when Malcolm Turner got here, and his first full day on the job, I followed him around a little bit. I was given some access to his day. We sat down for quite a while and had an on the record conversation, and then I walked around with him some more, and we talked a little bit off the record, and this speaks to as much as his personality and his openness as it does our reporting. But he had a lot of questions about the reading that story and follow-up stories, and he wanted to know, what I thought, what people had told me. We did a poll of fans of readers, what they think of the current stadium, what they would like at a new stadium. And he was very interested in that information. The poll that we did, we got, I don't know, it's something like 900 different comments where people would write, a couple paragraphs or a page of, this part of the stadium sucks. I think this should be added. This is dumb. Why would they put money into this other thing? And people would just pour out their remarks on that. And, we put some in stories that I wrote. You can't put thousands and thousands of pages of stuff. And so I talked with Malcolm and shared some of the general comments that I thought from reading all those. And he wanted to know, and the reason that he knew a lot of that existed was because of those stories that we had reported that I know he looked at and read and studied up on when he was thinking about taking the job.
His history has yet to be written, but I do see some good indications earlier. Just what I hear, that he's very responsive to things. The fact that he had read your stories and asked you about them does not surprise me based on what I've heard about him. It seems like to me, like you will see him on Twitter, he will respond to the least little concerns or complaints directed his way a lot. I see him interacting with fans a lot. And one thing that I had said, where I thought Vanderbilt had missed the mark for so long, is you get to know and meet their kids and their coaches, and they have some great stories that just go under the radar. I never had time to write them all, but if you're inside that AD, you know the stories better than I do, and you have the time to tell them more so than I do. I just thought that Vanderbilt was really missing an opportunity for a long time to tell stories through the personalities of its coaches and players, and that's one place where I see Vanderbilt making great progress since Malcolm Turner has taken over.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's, they've always got those great stories with their student athletes. And you're going to get that with a lot of academic schools, a lot of interesting kids that come from interesting families with interesting backgrounds. I think, those stories have always been told. I do think it's a little more deliberate now to make sure those stories get out there. I think they have had reinforced their energy as far as marketing and with media relations and a lot of other things over there. I think that's how Malcolm is tuned. One of my favorite things that I learned about him in the first couple weeks, month, from just being around him a little bit, interviewing him a couple times, swapping emails and text messages and those sort of things, is that he has this, Malcolm Turner has this routine that he goes through that if he comes to a place, and I've written this a little bit when he first got here, but it's there's a little more to it. When he comes and meets with somebody, when he comes and observes something, when he has a conversation, he sometimes will immediately email that person with the minutes of the meeting, so to speak. So he's done that with me before, where he and I will have a conversation about something, and then I'll get an email 20 minutes later that's 5 bullet points of what he and I had just talked about and what he thought the strongest points of the conversation were that he wanted to document, essentially. He's almost his own walking secretary. And I've heard from coaches that he's done the same thing, that he may sit down with Tim Corbin, let's say, and they talk about something that they want to tweak about how things are done over there, and he will immediately email him. The things that I want to remember, Tim, that we talked about are this, this, and this. I want to get back to you on this and this. And some of it is for that person to show that he cares of what they were talking about. And I think some of it is to just make notes for himself, so that whatever conversations he has, that they're productive and they're not just glad handing. So it's a pretty good strength for somebody in that position. We'll see if that wears him out over the next couple of years. But I thought it was a different approach. It was kind of a refreshing approach from an AD.
Adam, we have a few questions from listeners if you're up for answering those.
Yeah, I'll give it my best shot.
Our mailbag is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. If you need an insurance agent who wants to know your unique needs and circumstances and will tailor an insurance plan to fit them, then Josh is your guy. Call him at 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook at facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He's my agent. Give him a shot. I think you'll be pleased. Also, please give Josh a call to see how you can help with Camp Horizon. That is a camp for kids who are cancer patients that he helps sponsor. I know they're needing some help there, so it'd be great if some people listening who could donate a few $100s would give Josh a call and see where they can help in that case. Ann Arbordor says, my sense is that the Vanderbilt Board of Trust has the final say in athletic strategy and capital campaigns. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. Board of Trust has final say on pretty much everything, to my knowledge. And honestly, I think you would know more in your history on the beat about the Board of Trust than I would, just being perfectly honest. But yes, I believe so. The strategic plan, the athletic strategic plan, the capital campaign, all those things have to be vetted by the Board of Trust, to my knowledge. Now, a lot of that doesn't mean necessarily that they're in all the interworkings of those things. So, sometimes that's, you imagine anything in let's say government, so to speak. Sometimes the Congress, the congressmen or congresswomen that are voting on something, sometimes they're the last to see the bill, and then they vote yes or no. They're not necessarily there with their staffers through all of it. So this is something like the athletic strategic plan, and probably a lesser. Let's take the athletic strategic plan, and that involves the capital campaign, athletics, facilities, but a whole lot of other things. That is done so much by athletics that I don't even know that the Board of Trust would be privy to that as much, except for on the front end and the back end. They want to see the finished product. The athletic strategic plan, which Malcolm Turner has been the head of, they hired a consulting firm. What was the name of that one? That's the one everybody uses.
It's the Deloitte.
Deloitte.
Yeah, Deloitte.
Yes. I'm probably mispronouncing it, but okay. So they wanted a bunch of different voices on that to tell them what's wrong with Vanderbilt athletics, what needs to be fixed with Vanderbilt athletics. And they've reached out, and maybe some people on this podcast that are listening have been contacted if they're a booster, if they're in fundraising, something like that. But they wanted a media perspective on that. And so when I was in Omaha, I actually did about an hour-long conference call with the consulting firm to give them my take on what I thought the strengths and weaknesses and the path ahead and all that for Vanderbilt athletics is, and some of the recent history and issues. And that was facilitated by Vandy. They set that up. It wasn't me interviewing the consulting firm. It was the consulting firm interviewing me to have a media perspective. And I know they got a ton of different perspectives, but that was facilitated by Malcolm Turner and by the athletic department. And I don't think the Board of Trust necessarily sticks their nose into that. Now, they would have every right to stick their nose into it, but I don't think they really care about, how what the ingredients of the recipe look like. They just kind of want to see what the finished product is, what the meal tastes like.
Ann Arbor had a follow-up question to that, and this is a really good one. He says, is it safe to assume Malcolm Turner's vision for athletics would be unaffected by the new chancellor?
Yeah, I mean, well, here's the thing. When I get a new boss, I've got one idea about how things work. And if the new boss comes in the first meeting and says they've got a different plan, and are you good with that different plan? I say, yes, ma'am, or yes, sir. That's exactly what I think we should do. So I think Malcolm Turner absolutely would be unaffected by a new chancellor, unless that new chancellor comes in heavy-handed and wants to dictate things. I don't think that's going to happen, because similar to, like I said before, how Malcolm Turner went through the hiring process, he was given the okay that, hey, we are hiring you along with your ideas. So we are hiring you because you're bringing these ideas to the table. I think to some extent, probably a lesser extent, because the chancellor has a whole lot of things on their plate besides athletics, but I think to some extent that chancellor is going to come in knowing that, okay, you're on board with what we're doing in athletics here, right? And with the capital campaign and what we want to do with facilities, because we need we need continuity, we need stability, and we can't have you coming in and completely turning this thing upside down. So I think it would be unaffected generally. There would maybe be some tweaks to what Malcolm wants to do based on who the new chancellor is. But sometimes those tweaks can be good ones. Malcolm uses that. It's almost been a cliche with him, the listening tour. It's kind of a funny sounding thing, but it very much is true. And I've sat down with him a handful of times and realized that he actually wants to hear other people's ideas. And if he hears a better idea than he's had to that point, he will adopt that new idea. And if that comes from the chancellor, then all the better. I don't think his plan is going to be unaffected unless a better idea comes along.
Well, the other thing, too, is I just think it is hard for them to put the toothpaste back in the tube. Let's say that they do get a new chancellor and he's got different ideas. I just think that the fact that what you guys put out there in print, and the fact that they've basically since acknowledged that, yeah, some stuff needs changing, I think that's kind of I know that's not why you wrote it, but that's kind of almost the insurance to me that things will change. Is that I just think that they are so far down the road with this, and they got called out to such an extent that I think they don't have much of a choice but to address it, even if the other chancellor might have a different opinion on things.
I think you're probably on the right course there. And whoever becomes the chancellor, they're probably going to recognize that. This has been something with Chancellor Zeppos, and I think others in the past, chancellor in the administration. If athletics can take care of itself, I think generally the Vanderbilt chancellor would like to be more hands off on athletics. Now that became a problem the last few years because athletics was not being given enough help, enough aid, so to speak. But if athletics can do what it needs to do and it has the leader to do it, I think the chancellor typically would like to say, great, I don't have to worry about that. I've got a whole lot of other issues with an Ivy League caliber school that I need to deal with. If you can handle all the how to compete in the SEC type stuff, more power to you. And Malcolm Turner, I think, has a personality to go to a chancellor and say, I got this. And so I think whoever the chancellor is will probably adhere to a lot of the plans that he already has in place when they arrive.
Bighorn Sheep has a question for you based on some stuff that I've said. It has been my opinion that they are about to commit unprecedented financial resources to athletics that we've probably never seen in my lifetime. And he just wants to know if you feel like the climate within Vanderbilt has changed enough to where you agree with that opinion.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty big dollar figure when we hear it. Not to say that that's all going to come at once. I mean, no, the easiest answer is to say, yeah, there's going to be some major money thrown around for what they want to do with an athletic capital campaign because things cost more now than last time they did anything. The renovation in 1981, that number was a lot smaller than the number we're going to see this time because it was 1981. But it's also not going to be, Texas A&M right now has, I think their renovation is like $500 million, which is mind-boggling. It's, that Vandy's not going to do something to that extent, but whatever the number or numbers are, I think you're still going to have some people that say, you're going to have some that says, okay, that sounds like we're moving in the right direction. You're going to have some others that are going to say, they're going the cheap route. You're going to say, well, what are you talking about? The cheap route? That's 9 figures or that's 8 figures. It's still cheap, the cheap route, because they're going to be comparing it to fill in the blank SEC school, which that number is never going to be as big as whatever that school is. And that's fine. That's what Vandy stands for better or worse. But yeah, I think generally speaking, I think there is quite a push over there to put more money in than has been put in the past because there's more of just that feeling over there, but also just things cost more. So you're not going to get anything done with a low ball figure.
I have one follow-up question from me from all that. One of the big mysteries I've had is I know for a fact that I believe this was the fall of 2015 was when this was supposed to start. I could be a few months off, but they were planning a capital campaign that was going to include athletics. And I do not know for sure what happened, but I've heard it speculated that they didn't believe enough in David to raise the money, that it was canceled. I'm sure that might have been a factor, and if it were, you should have made a change then. But the other explanations were the fallout of the Vanderburgh mess, which I don't think you were around for that. But no. I know that changed things substantially. And then they also had other priorities. You have the dorms that they are building now, which are going to be just stunning when they are done. So I know you have a competition for resources. I was never able to find out an exact answer to that. Did you have any success getting the answer to that question yourself?
No, and that was on the front end of when I got on the beat. So I knowing somewhat how the environment is over there, at least it was back a few years ago, I would suspect what that was is when enthusiasm waned, people pulled away. It's best laid plans, and then you look around the room and say who's willing to push their part aside. And I think athletics was usually that part. Who's willing to push their part aside so that the rest of us can be good going forward, and also who are we willing to push aside, and that was usually athletics. But specifics of that capital campaign, I don't know. I mean, I remember just living here and covering Middle Tennessee at the time, the rape trial and all that. Well, that really, you hate to use the word leverage when it's something as serious as that, but if you just look at the overall climate, a lot of the leverage of athletics was taken away by all that. And it took quite a while to get any leverage back from that. It's kind of hard when that's going on. Not that that has anything to do with building a stadium or renovating lockers or anything like that. But when that type of stain is in the athletic department, even if it's just involving four guys, it's hard to demand leverage or to try to enact leverage when that's going on. I think that probably played a lot into it. And not to mention, you had Derek Mason coming in as a first-time head coach, and he's trying to figure out how to win in the SEC. He's not necessarily equipped to go out and say, well, he's a first-time head coach, so he can't say, well, I was at this school and we raised money to do this, and I was at this other school and we got a new football facility built. He's kind of learning the ropes of how to run a team and how to put a coaching staff together. I don't think he was terribly worried on the front end about how to raise money to get some things done. So I think a lot of anything with the capital campaign probably would have been pushed aside. And it's not that wouldn't have hurt Vandy Athletics, but it may have not been as many vocal people to jump in and fight for it because they had other things they need to take care of.
Yeah, and I think you bring up some good points. I don't know if this is a fair way to characterize it, but I know that the Vanderburgh incident really embarrassed them, and I always thought that they handled that really well. I thought their response was great. There were some unfortunate things that happened with Metro that really bloodied their nose in the papers, but I thought in terms of how Vanderbilt handled it, it was a very well-intended response. It kind of went sideways on them for some reasons beyond their control, but it almost seemed like, and I've heard people say Zeppos was really in on athletics, which I can kind of see that. Nick is as a politician from the way that everybody has described him. And if the political winds blew south quickly, I don't know how well he and David got along. I could kind of see him holding that over David in a way to say, well, you're the one that hired James Franklin. He's the coach that brought us this mess. You're the one who propped him up and gave him power. So therefore, you're going to go stand in the corner for a few years. I don't know if that's exactly how it happened, but I would imagine that didn't help.
Yeah. I don't know the interworkings of. I don't know. It would be a lot of speculation for me to go one way or the other with that. I think there was a lot of pressure, and I got in on the beat right after that and dealt with a lot of the. I came in basically when Derek Mason got here and during all the rape trials. So not when the actual crime occurred, but all the fallout and all that of it. And a lot of what I remembered was people just trying to move on beyond that so much that I think any conversations that would involve that and would be cast aside quickly. Whether it was something that helped or hurt, I think that was the case.
Okay, I've got a follow-up question here from Bighorn Sheep. He says, do you have a gut feeling on what will ultimately done with Memorial Gym in terms of improvements? He says, do you think even if it were a very small percentage chance that tearing down Memorial's even on the table, he says, I think that would be horrible.
Yeah, tearing down Memorial, that ain't gonna happen. I mean, I guess we can just say that would be at a tremendous cost. We can also say it's not really needed. But I think the other obvious, maybe emotional reason, I think is what he's hitting on, and that is it's the opposite reaction as a football stadium, right? If they tear down the football stadium and build a new one, people will do cartwheels. If they announce tomorrow, hey, we're going to tear down Memorial Gym and build something new, you'd have a handful of people that would be happy about that. I think you'd have a whole lot of people be like, no, you're not tearing down my childhood, or you're not tearing down, where my parents and grandparents and great grandparents have all these memories. You're not going to, you would Memorial Magic would come to its own defense, I feel like. So I don't see that happening. They're just going to continue to improve what they have. And by the way, anytime you put a good amount of money into a facility, that means, that indicates that you're not going to tear down the facility. And they haven't put a ton of money into it, but they're starting to. You've got new lighting that was just put in this summer. I know even for the Tennessean, we had to go over and take our strobe lights down for our photographers because they put new lighting in there. They have a new sound system in there. A lot of the aesthetics, I think, are going to be a little different, not necessarily this season, but next. I remember a big thing that David Williams told me back before was that it was just an enormous cost, that if you were going to do some type of renovation in there, it was going to cost several $1 million just to put an HVAC, a heat and air in there, especially the air conditioning. If you've been in there and felt how hot it can get in the summer, that before you did anything structurally to that place, you would have to dump several $1 million into it just to get basically get the pipes going in the direction that they needed to. You had to do a major overhaul in terms of that, and that's what they've been looking at. And if you're looking at that, you're certainly not going to get that fixed and then tear down the whole structure a few years later. Memorial's going to be fine. It'll get renovated. Now, here's the interesting take on that question. I just wonder, I'm curious to know if the hiring of Jerry Stackhouse tilts the scales just a little bit on Memorial versus Vanderbilt Stadium in terms of renovations, in terms of money, because Malcolm Turner and Derek Mason get along really, really well. But he gets along great with Jerry Stackhouse, and he hired Jerry Stackhouse. And Jerry Stackhouse, wants improvements to that program and that facility and all those sort of things. Can you do both? Maybe, and that's kind of the point of an overall capital campaign with what we said before, a really big number. But are the scales tilted a little more because it's Jerry Stackhouse there and not Bryce Drew? Certainly if Stackhouse wins more, I think the scales could be tilted a little more. I just say that, for example, because, Malcolm Turner mentioned in his statement about some of the renovations that are coming. You heard where he mentioned in there that me and Derek Mason have had a lot of conversations, and we want to improve things with the team facility and the locker room and all that. Well, that's what Derek Mason wants. He wants improvements at the team facility, I think, more than the stadium. That's kind of the Jordan Rodgers take, right? That you fix that because that helps recruiting more than just the stadium. Well, you can do that for cheaper. You can put $50 million, let's say, just a kind of a round number, into a team facility and lockers and those sort of things, and get a whole lot more done than you can in the football stadium. So you can make your football coach happy, and you can make the players happy by doing something that's less expensive, and then still have more money to put it into Memorial, as opposed to putting an enormous number into the stadium right away and not have anything to do to appease your basketball coach. I think there's a lot of the balancing act that Malcolm Turner is trying to do there. And with the firing of Bryce Drew and the hiring of Jerry Stackhouse, I think it just adds another layer onto that.
Well, you made several good points there, and I want to return to something on Jerry Stackhouse in a moment, but I missed one question from Ann Arbor. This was the part of the original questions we did in the mailbag. He wants to know if Malcolm Turner will have more access to the board of trusts than David Williams did.
I don't think so. I mean, I think David he had a very good relationship with the board of trust. I mean, he had quite a respect over there, and so I think it was a very open door policy. David did, it's fair to have some criticism about how he worked in athletics, but he could kind of dance between athletics and the campus side, the academics, very well and very easily. So to say that a new AD would have more access, I'm not so sure if that's the case. Maybe he would have more access that he would initiate. If you want to get things done, and I mentioned before that Malcolm is all about communication, and he wants to reach out to everybody. He wants to sit down and have lunch with everybody. He wants to get everybody's take, and he wants to move forward with things. If he wants to initiate more contact in that way, then that would probably be a little more different than just David's management style. So from that aspect, maybe if that's what he's seeking, I think the board of trust is open to that. My question is Ann Arbor, is that Eric Bakich? Is that who that is?
No, I don't think that's Eric Bakich, but I do know this. Okay. I think he actually is very close to that stadium. I think he lives like a mile or two from it. So
okay, I think this deserves an investigation.
Maybe Eric Bakich could be the next AD when Malcolm's done.
Well, I was going to,
or at least Ann Arbor.
If Ann Arbor starts asking how come Tim Corbin hasn't retired yet, I think we're onto something.
I'm assuming this guy's telling us the truth. What if it really is Eric Bakich? So
it'd be a good way to do it. I've known of coaches that have had aliases on the message boards and elsewhere to get information or to put their own story up there. So don't put it past a Michigan baseball coach.
Right. Like I said, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, so you never know.
That's right.
I will say, I think there's something there that might be worth exploring. And this goes back to a comment that is kind of in the back of my head. I think that the board was more involved with the hiring of Malcolm Turner just because of all the embarrassment from what you guys put in the paper. I think the board at that point, it got its hand forced a little bit. So I think it's possible. And I think Bruce Evans is the chair. That's a name that doesn't come up a lot. But the very few people I know that have had any interaction with him seem to like him. I think maybe just by the nature of the process, he could have more involvement with the board just because they were, I think, more hands-on in getting the AD this time around in the hire.
Well, and that's maybe a good indicator of the open door that you're talking about, because if you're on the front end of the hiring process, you're already buying into the ideas of the guy that you're hiring. So that would be, I agree, that would probably be a pretty good indicator that the communication is probably a little better, because you signed on to this guy, so you better kind of enact his plans if that's what you hired him for.
Okay, Mr. Vandy wants to know your opinion of Jerry Stackhouse since he arrived on campus.
Oh, boy. Which part? Here's the thing is, anybody that tells you, I feel like this guy's going to win, they don't have a clue. Because I don't have a clue. You don't have a clue. Jerry Stackhouse doesn't have a clue. He is where he has coached. He has been a very good coach. That's a very small sampling, but it's what he's done. You can't hold it against the guy that he hasn't coached longer. Where he has coached and what he's done, he's earned pretty high marks. Everywhere he's been an assistant, people have wanted to promote him very quickly. He was an assistant for a short time in the NBA, and people wanted to put him up for a head coaching job. So he has succeeded quickly at that level. In the G League, he won a championship. For what that means, that's a different skill set, but it's certainly something that I know Malcolm Turner took into account. So the small sampling that we have says that he's a good coach. And now, does that necessarily translate to being a good coach at the college level in the SEC with college kids, managing scholarships? It's one thing to pick out talent. It's another thing to be able to pick out talent and to balance it with, I'm going to sign 2 kids this year so that I can sign 4 kids next year. I'm going to take this grad transfer, and I'm going to take this other sit-out Division I transfer rather than signing these guys that I want to develop over time. I mean, there's so much that goes into that job, even beyond the, just dealing with the fact they're student athletes and not just paid college basketball play or paid basketball players like what he would deal with in the NBA. So is he going to succeed? I have no idea. And I don't know how much of an indication we're going to get this first season. I do think we'll have a better idea once we get to SEC play, because I think judging on what he's done so far will be pretty difficult because everybody's optimistic and it's a new day and, it's the players are reacting well to him and he's going to be really good for Aaron Neesmith because they're similar players, and he actually already knew some people in Neesmith's background, and they've got a good rapport. And so it'd be easy to pick out. We could pick out things and say they're headed on the right direction. I could be just as cynical and say, well, Bryce Drew was headed in the right direction. People aren't going to like this. Vandy fans aren't going to like this, but I almost compare it a little bit to Tennessee football coaches by a lesser degree, because this is Bryce Drew. Kevin Stallings struggled some late in his tenure. Overall was pretty good, but struggled late in his tenure with some different things. Bryce Drew fell off a cliff in year 3. And so now I think it almost leads people to be more cynical, like what has happened at Tennessee football, right? Again, a lesser degree. This isn't, 4 coaches or whatever, but think about how Tennessee football has been. Lane Kiffin is the answer. He's absolutely the answer. Okay, well, Derek Dooley's probably the answer. Butch Jones, I hope, is the answer. Jeremy Pruitt's not the answer. And you get more and more cynical and you believe it less over time. All I'm saying with that is I think people are going to look at Jerry Stackhouse and it's going to be, I think he's the right guy, but I'm going to have to see it first. And I'm probably going to have to see him win more than I did Bryce Drew for me to believe it, because I'm not going to be tricked again like I was with Bryce Drew. I think there's some reasonable Vandy fans that are going to feel that way. I don't think wins and losses are going to tell the story as much with him year 1, though. It's going to be progress. And all the things that I think Bryce struggled with, primarily, which was developing players and adjusting in season and in games, if you see that from Jerry Stackhouse, I think there'll be a whole lot more reason for optimism.
My theory, unless he is really good or really bad, is I just don't think we're going to know for 3 or 4 years. I know that there is a group of fans that bristles against what I'm about to say. Right now, I think it's the toughest job in the league. They're far behind on facilities. You've got 13 other really good coaches for the most part, maybe 11 or 12, however you want to divide that. But you've got a lot of names. I mean, Tom Crean has got the worst winning percentage in college among the returning coaches in the league, which is everybody but Jerry Stackhouse. Well, Tom Crean's been to a Final Four and won 2 Big Ten titles at another school. So I just think it's a tough landscape because of all that. You've got the 20-game losing streak. I just don't think we're going to know for a while, Adam, unless he is either something happens to where the job is either way over his head, like it happened with Bryce Drew this last year, which even in that case, they're not going to get rid of him after the first year. Not that I'm suggesting that's what's going to happen by any stretch, because I just don't think we know. But I just think it's going to be a longer time horizon. I just think they were further behind with basketball than maybe some of their fans would care to admit. Not that they can't win, not that I don't see the same things that a lot of fans do. I think this could be a really good program, and I think that they felt when they hired Bryce Drew that they could be a sleeping giant. I agree with all that, but the problem is the Giants slept the last 3 years while everybody else got ahead.
Yeah, that may be some of it. I think the got ahead part is what I would stick to as much as anything. I don't think Vandy's program is taking a step back or anything, of just an overall view. Now, they were terrible last year, but that's a season. That's not a program. That's a team, not a program, so to speak. I do think men's basketball has just become a greater priority in the conference. Vandy basketball, I won't say it was easy to have really good seasons there for a while, but it's a little more manageable because the rest of the conference was so saturated with thoughts of football and so eat up with got to win in football. And, a lot of the conferences, I'd say all the conferences, figured out you can kind of do both. You can put a certain amount of resources into getting the right coach and the right facilities and all that, and you can win in basketball pretty quick. And this conference has turned out to be a really good basketball conference. Vandy hasn't really fallen back. It's just the rest of the conference has kind of caught up. I compared a little bit to, you and I are around the same age. Think about women's basketball back when we were kids in the 80s and maybe early 90s. You could kind of count on one hand the elite teams in women's basketball in the country. And then after a few years, you could count the elite teams on two hands and no more. Well, there's a whole lot more really good women's basketball teams now. And by the way, that's a whole nother story about why Vandy women's basketball is falling behind. But just sticking to the comparison, I think that's a little bit of what happened in SEC men's basketball, is that everybody else said, we want to make this a priority. And so when everybody else does that, it's just not as easy to win anymore like it was before.
Speaking of basketball, one more question. This is a blast from the past. Bighorn Sheep says, after the incident where Kevin Stallings got caught on tape saying he would blanking kill Wade Baldwin, and he says in parentheses, which I think was overblown in terms of many folks talking about it literally, and I agree with him on that. I think that was overblown very much in that regard. Anyway, he says, did you notice any real change in Kevin Stallings in terms of practices and whether he lost any of his fire in his coaching or things like that?
No. Because what I would see from Kevin in practice is that people may not believe this, but what I saw in that blow up with Wade Baldwin was not the norm to me. Now, I have been told by those that covered Kevin, or around Kevin when he was covered before I got on the beat. Again, I got here in 2014, got on the Vandy beat in 2014. Is that, and these are other media members in Nashville and so on, that he had kind of cooled off not long before that. And I guess there are different reasons for that. But by the time I got on the beat in 2014, I thought Kevin was, people saw how Kevin was, and he was, he kind of let it fly when he wanted to, but I don't think that was necessarily the norm. I think you could pick out little times when his temper would get the best of him. It certainly did in that instance, but to say that he cooled off after that would say that he was pretty heated before. I've heard stories. I just didn't see it. And certainly not when I was on the beat. I saw that. I thought Kevin, in terms of temperament, was not terribly unlike a lot of the other coaches that I've been around. He's an old school guy, and he shouldn't have said that to Wade Baldwin. By the way, Wade Baldwin, to this day, anytime that I've ever mentioned it to him, he's fine with it. He kind of gets it, Kevin didn't do that, but I'm sure Wade has done that with teammates and with others. And, that's a lot of players are perfectly fine with that. But no, I don't think Kevin cooled off, because I didn't think he was that. I think that was a very isolated incident in itself. Had Kevin, if it was reversed, and if Bryce Drew had been fired like he was, and he's soft spoken, and he's overly optimistic, and he doesn't criticize anybody, and he's not tough enough, and all these things, and then you hired Kevin Stallings after him, we would look at Kevin probably in a different light. Now, that wouldn't last. Once Kevin was losing, then we'd say, I got to get a more optimistic guy coming here, a guy that doesn't cuss players and all that. That's, it depends on who you follow and who follows you. And Kevin Kevin wasn't at Vandy anymore because he didn't win enough, and he certainly didn't win enough in late February and March. I don't think it has much to do with any of that. I don't think his behavior really changed that much, but I don't think it had that much of a need to change based on what I saw in the last 3 or 4 seasons.
Well, I think part of Kevin's issue was there were several raging lunatic moments the decade before that. I do think that he'd cooled off to some degree, but between that and just not treating some people very well away from the scenes, it's kind of like that blow up with Wade Baldwin kind of lent credence to anything anybody had said about him. And I think if Kevin, I think if he had just been not that guy earlier in his career and nicer to people behind the scenes, I think he would have gotten a lot of benefit of the doubt that he didn't get late. That's my theory on it. I could be wrong, but I think that some of the stuff that happened before you were on the beat probably was always in the back of people's minds.
Yeah, and I've heard a ton of these stories before I was on the beat, and I think you're right. I think for those that saw that for a long time and didn't like it, and maybe didn't see it as much for a little while, when they saw the incident with Wade Baldwin, and by the way, after a win, they won that game at Tennessee. That was after a win. People forget that. When that happened, I think some people that remembers all those and was critical of Kevin earlier in his career said, there it is. I knew it. He's still the same old guy. We got to get rid of this guy. He hadn't learned anything. He's the same old Kevin Stallings. And those that didn't see as much of that, or maybe like me, had come around the program a little later, maybe, and not me specific, but people in that would come along later as I did, would maybe look at it and say, whoa, what is this? Is this guy out of control? And then suddenly when you see tough losses of the team not winning as much as they should, then you can kind of add that to the narrative, and it makes it a little easier to be critical about what's going on the court.
Well, and in fairness to Kevin, it's like when you see two good friends and one of them blows up over something that seems trivial or minor. It's not about that. It's about the other stuff. And you could see Wade stirring the pot in that whole incident before Kevin, before anything ever happened. You could physically see it going on, and I suspect that there'd been enough of those that was just Kevin snapping at the wrong time and the wrong place. I'm not defending him for the way he reacted, but I have to think that played into it.
Yeah, and that's the old, you got to remember where the hot mic is. Remember where the hot mic is? And you got to think about what TV is. Everybody's on TV now. You got to take that to the locker room.
Well, Kevin was, I think, very fortunate that there wasn't a hot mic in the wrong place a long time before that, because honestly, I was surprised it took as long as it did for something like that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's and you and I both know this, and I would imagine some fans know this, but not all fans. Things like that people see on TV, you put coaches in that category, and then you put other coaches in a different category where you think they would never say that, do that, explode like that. Yeah, they do. They do it behind a closed door, and just as much as that, and many times more, you just don't see it. And I guess that is better if we're talking about what's bad or good, and that's such a moving target, it's such a wide range of that. But a lot of the coaches that I've covered, but really a lot of the other sports writers that I know that we swap stories about coaches, they say, no, actually that guy is like this, not like that. And I think a lot of fans don't know that, but that's those coaches have the right to keep that behind closed doors because that's where they want it. That's where they put it. A friend of mine, I've had this conversation before where they've said, so-and-so, that coach is such well-mannered, and I like how they don't say these things, and they don't approach kids like that. And then I would say, actually, I know somebody that covers them, and actually that coach, and I've done that with this friend, and I've said this a number of times, and finally they said, okay, no, don't tell me anymore. I don't want to know. I want to have this idealized version of that coach. I don't really want to know how they are behind closed doors. And I think that's how a lot of fans would like it to be, and I can understand that.
Yeah, I think that's how John Wooden's legacy has survived to the degree that it has. I think people preferred kind of the man behind the curtain in the wizard machine, so to speak.
Yeah, that's where documentaries a half a century later sometimes tell a different story on somebody, right?
Exactly. All right, last one. I'm going to get you out of here. VU Matt 23 wants to know, what does Adam think about the defense? How do you think it will improve significantly over the course of the year? Actually, he said, do you think it will, rather than how will it? So I'll let you answer that.
Well, I thought it was interesting how Derek Mason has very subtly called out his inside linebackers. Now, I will say you were on this more than I was last year. You know, you and I would talk about what's wrong with the defense at different times, and you would say it's the inside linebackers. And I would say, well, I think maybe this, they blew that coverage, where's the pass rush? And I remember you would, usually in the Tuesday press conferences, I think, you'd come back and you would even ask some questions to Derek about inside linebacker. And at that time, he wouldn't bite on it quite as much. I thought it was interesting at SEC Media Days and also at the press conference earlier this week that he said, our inside linebackers got to step up. They got to carry us. So to answer the question, they've got to be better at that position. In a 3-4 defense, you cannot have a weakness up the middle. You can at any defense, but you cannot be weak up the middle. You have to be good against the run up front, and you have to be good at inside linebacker. I think you can survive on the perimeter a little bit more at outside linebacker based on scheme. If you're in a nickel, if you have good corners, if you have safeties that are good at crowding the box, you can use different things in scheme to make up for what goes on the perimeter. If you're getting gashed in the middle at inside linebacker and defensive line, you're not going to survive. So I think if they get better, it's going to be inside linebacker play. Maybe that's a Dimitri Moore because that's a guy that racked up a lot of tackles last year. I'll be interested to see if he can turn kind of become a stat stuffer last year with those tackles and turn into a more complete player. I mean, he was a redshirt freshman last year, so he did as much as you could ask of anybody. But I think they've got to be better against the run. So if they're going to be good, if they're going to be better, it's going to have to be against the run, which will put them in better, third and long situations, better down and distance situations, which is going to make their pass rush better. It's going to make their pass defense better. But everything kind of starts with that. What are you doing on 1st and 10 against the run? And by the way, we're gonna see that early on because Georgia's going to come in, and if Georgia doesn't have to throw it, they're not going to throw it. Now Jake Fromm will use the play action a little bit if he needs to, but if they can run it 3/4 of the time, Kirby Smart will be absolutely fine to send a message to the rest of the league and certainly to his own team that, hey, we're a bruising physical team, and so we're going to run it on you, and we're going to be physical. Coaches love that, especially in season openers, because they feel like it sets the tone for the season. So if Vandy allows the run, they will run. And LSU, all this talk of we're a spread offense and we're going to do all these different things that LSU is not known for. We've heard that every year since I've been alive. They'll want to come in and run with power also. So Vandy will get tested in that way, and they're going to have to adjust because they're going to give up some rushing yards to those two teams. But when they get to the middle of the schedule, they're going to have to be better at that, better tackling, tougher up front. And, they've added some size to the defensive line. We'll see if that matters. That I don't want to be skeptical about that, but sometimes when you hear coaches say we've added size and, you've traded in some 290-pound defensive linemen for some 305-pound defensive linemen. Okay, all right. That may work. Sometimes you're just adding 15 pounds to the same guy. So we'll see, but they got to be better against the run.
Two things. I mean, they are clearly putting a lot more stock in their defensive line, and I think they are upgrading their talent. Whether it's ready to be impact-level talent this year, I don't know. I tend to think that's a year off. But the linebackers thing, the reason I kept asking about that is I know you probably noticed this too. I would go to practice, and there would be nowhere where they would rotate probably more than on the inside. So I'm just thinking they've got some depth here, at least as they view it. The parts seem to be fairly interchangeable. Then they go into the season, and I get a thing from Pro Football Focus every week where I'm looking at how they grade the players. Now, granted, that may not be the way the players are graded by the coaches, so opinions could differ there, and I respect that. But the inside linebackers were not grading well, but on top of that, Dimitri Moore would play literally the whole game. He might miss a snap or two, maybe, but at the end of the year, he was on the field almost 100% of the time, and Jordan Griffin wasn't far behind. Now, coaches are in tough spots sometimes because they may have an injury or a discipline issue or something like that to where they can't really answer your question directly, and I respect that. But I just was shocked with as much as they had that they chose to go with those same guys over and over and over when they weren't grading out very well, at least according to Pro Football Focus.
Yeah, and with those, now I will say what I said on the front end about size. I will give them some credit for trying an adjustment. So to add size, if something's not working, try something different. So I give them credit for trying that. We'll see if it works or not. And inside linebacker, I mean, I think this is a pretty interesting year there, because if you look at what they have at inside linebacker, I know guys can shift back and forth, but what they list at inside linebacker is Dimitri Moore, Folletti, Braden DeVault-Smith, Colin Anderson, Austin Orgy. What do all those guys have in common? They're all sophomores. Now, 4 of those guys are redshirts, so they're third-year sophomores, and then Orgy is a true sophomore. But you're coming to the point, especially with the third-year players, that you're kind of hitting the hump day, so to speak, in your career. This is where you kind of show some progress that you're going to be a player in time, or you're not. And it's going to be pretty evident by the end of your third year, maybe early in your third year. So if they don't have an answer at inside linebacker this time, and I think they're going to know it early in the season, then they're going to have to change up some plans. Now, I think Dimitri Moore is going to be he's going to be a really good player. Colin Anderson, if he's healthy, is he a good player? I think if he's healthy, he probably is, but we haven't seen enough of him. DeVault-Smith is an interesting one, because DeVault-Smith has been a guy that they have kind of touted as this, he's better than what his star rating was. He's better than what you think. He's an overachiever. And I see all that, but, at some point, overachiever has to kind of match up to where you're projected at. And I think this is the year where he should be able to help him if it's going to be a guy that to help him. Orgy, we'll see. I think he's an interesting athlete. I think he's probably going to be a good player, but who knows? I think you're onto the right thing, that they've got to have both depth and balance there. Their twos have to be almost as good as their ones, and they're not going to have depth if they don't have that. I think last year, a lot what they ran into was these 2 guys will somewhat stop the run, and these 2 guys can somewhat drop into coverage. The rest of the guys we're not really sure about. So let's just kind of like a running back, right? If you can have 80% of one guy running the ball, if he's better than the other guy at 100%, you just kind of stick with the guy at 80%. I think that's what they leaned on. They know in the course of a season, though, that's not going to work this year, but they'll be grinded out in those first 3 games, so we'll see how much depth they have.
Adam, you have been incredibly generous with your time today. I think this was a terrific interview. I appreciate you taking this really on a few hours' notice, too. I know you are working hard on some stories for camp. I want to give you the floor to talk about what is coming up in the Tennessean and promote your Twitter account and anything else that you would like to discuss.
You can go read my coverage in the Tennessean and print, Tennessean.com. We've actually got a lot of deals right now on very inexpensive digital subscriptions. We have deals going all the time, but it's very inexpensive. And you can do a digital only. You don't have to do the print if you're not the kind that really reads a newspaper in your hand. You can follow me on Twitter at Adam Sparks. The coverage for this next week or so in camp, going to be hitting a lot of different things just in terms of personnel and competitions that you would expect. One thing I'll have probably early this next week, I'm hoping this gets put out, is what people will look at as a kind of a cynical take, but it's a true take on kind of tips of how to follow preseason practices, preseason camp. And this isn't just for Vandy fans, for all fans, but I'm writing it from the Vandy perspective of, when you see a coach say this, that's not what he means. When you see this type of stat for a quarterback in a scrimmage, don't believe it. When you different tips like this, if you see this on the depth chart, that disregard that, and I'll tell you what it actually means. Some of those sort of things that I've actually reached out to the beat writers in their network and said, what types of things do you wish fans knew that and kind of cut through some of the crap of what we hear in interviews and that sort of thing? For example, the one of them I'm writing is how every coach says we're bigger, stronger, faster, and they say that every year, right? What they say is not actually what you think that means, and that's one of the tips that I'm writing. So we'll have that. It'll be at Tennessean.com probably early this next week, sometime right after the weekend.
I'm looking forward to seeing that. I have a feeling I'll get a silent chuckle or two out of reading it.
I think you'll recognize a whole lot of things on there. It's probably some that you and I have kind of rolled our eyes at before at practices.
There will be some silent head nodding when I read that for sure. Hey, Adam, thank you so much today. He is Adam Sparks of the Tennessean. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. We appreciate you listening as always, and we'll catch you again next week.